Merry Christmas, everybody. I was kind of messing around this morning, looking at my traps, all my gear, and I just thought it would be a great time to do a tips video. I haven't done one in a while, and hope you get something out of this. First thing I'll show you is one of my traps. This is a jack trap, which I tend to like this style. They're really good to use right out of the box. I mean, they're fine-tuned, they're quality materials, but I did do a few modifications, and you can't really tell until I open them up. One of the things that I did do is I added some reflective tape. Here all the time, well, not all the time, but occasionally I like to fish in those low light conditions, and this will keep your trap from being run over by a snowmobile, hopefully, and you can also find your trap if you're out night fishing. I also put my name on it. Important. This is a standard 26-inch jack trap. Everybody has these. They look just like the guy that you might be fishing beside. You don't want to get home and realize you got somebody else's traps, or one of your traps is missing. I also number them. You can see right on top of my reflective tape, I got a number 3 on this one. And I do that just because I might have my traps rigged differently. I might have one that's set underneath the ice, one that's set halfway, and I know by the number, I can remember which one that is. The line that I put on here, I like to always use the heaviest line I can find. This happens to be 50 pound. And I do that for a couple of reasons. It tends to last longer, and you won't have as many knots. The lighter you go, you know, you get on those fish that take a long run, it's windy, you get a lot of knots as you're bringing the line in. This heavier line kind of keeps that from happening. The leaders that I use, which I would never just put a hook right on this line. That would be an absolute no. I would never do that. The hooks that I use are really the ones I like the most are these Eagle Claw, and everyone's probably seen these or used them, or an Eagle Claw that comes in the package. I really recommend, for most species and most setups, you want to have a snelled hook. And by a snelled hook, I mean the line is tied to the shank of the hook. It's not tied to the eye of the hook, it's tied to the shank to the hook. And what makes it great is the fact that with it being snelled, it keeps your hook upright. Your hook's not going to float to the side. If I hold it up here, you can see it hanging. Hopefully the camera can see it. The hook's always going to be hanging straight. If you tie it to the eye, sometimes your hook can be bent off to the side. It can even go all the way up to where it's like this, which is what you don't want. This is always going to be in a true good hooking position. What I mean by hooking position is hooking the fish position. Top of the mouth, side of the mouth. Okay? Now, in between the hook and the line, I even have a longer leader. And I typically use a mid-sized line weight. I like 14 or 15 pound. fluorocarbon, preferably fluorocarbon, and I use fluorocarbon for a couple of reasons. Fluorocarbon is completely 100% invisible in the water. You won't see it. It's also a Strata-Line. It doesn't have the memory or the coil of monofilament. So once you straighten it out, it's very hard to see in the water and the fish don't see it. Now, another good thing is fluorocarbon is denser than monofilament, which means you can get it sinks in the water. Monofilament floats in the water, fluorocarbon sinks. You can get away with a smaller sinker or less weight on your line because this line is going to help your hook or your bait sink, which is another benefit from fluorocarbon. One of the only negatives that I can really say about fluorocarbon in the winter time is it's brittle. It can be brittle in really cold temps, and that's why you kind of use like a little heavier line, like a 14 or 15. I'll never go lighter than that. If you go lighter than that, sometimes I use 8 or 10 pound. You're gonna break off big fish, especially in cold weather. So you can get away with a heavier line because it's invisible, and it'll also help your hook or your line to sink down. You can get away with less weight. Now, in between my 50 pound Dacron line, I have a connection that I use. And I like to use a barrel swivel. These happen to be number 8, which is a pretty common size I would use. You can get away with probably a little bit smaller than that, but number 8 is a good size, easy to work with. And I almost always use a Berkley Trilene knot to connect my knots, connect my lines together. You know, it's a really simple knot. You just go up through again until you make a loop. I'm going to pull it out so my loop is like inside my finger, and then I'm going to twist 6 times. Then I'm going to go back through that double loop that I've made. Hold the tag end, and I always wet it a little bit because it cinches together easier. You never want to cinch your knots dry because that you're gonna have a weak knot. It's gonna have a breaking point if you do that. You gotta have some lubrication. And then this little tag end, I'm gonna clip off with these fingernail clippers, and I always have these around my neck when I'm fishing, whether I'm in the boat, brook fishing, ice fishing. Tag off, cut that tag off. That's a solid knot that will not come untied, that will not break, and I leave just a little bit of a tag sticking there. And that tag is going to show me that that knot is secure, and if once that tag starts looking really frayed and ugly looking, I know I need to retie it. Okay. The next part, I attach the fluorocarbon to the other end of my barrel swivel, and I'm also going to use a Berkley Trilene knot. And we'll see how quick I can do this. Back up through, hold the tag end, wet it, cinch it. Clip off the tag end. Now, this is a question I get asked a lot. How long should my leaders be? And I think the biggest mistake that people do is they either have too long of a leader or they don't use a leader. You kind of want to have a leader, and typically what I've been running, and I've been probably running this probably the last 10 years, I run a 4-foot leader. You don't need a 7-foot. You don't need a 10-foot. The only exception I might have to that is if I'm fishing up under the ice and I want to fish like 10 feet down, I might run a 10-foot leader. Other than that, if I'm fishing near bottom, I'm fishing around structure, weeds, anything, I'm running with a 4-foot leader. That's all you need. And a 4-foot for me, and you want to do this, take a tape measure. You want to know what 4 feet is for you. I know that when I hold line like this is 4 feet. 4 feet, I make a loop, cut it off. Try to cut it off, there we go. Okay, now that I've got this 4-foot leader, I'm going to attach my hook to it. And like I showed you earlier, I have a leadered hook or a snelled hook. This snelled hook has a loop on the end. And that loop is going to help us attach it. It's going to help us be able to remove it and replace it. Because when we're fishing and we're fishing for different fish, we're going to change size of hooks all the time. We're not always going to use the same size hook for everything. The size of the hook, and this is another question I get asked a lot, what size hook should I use? The size of the hook really, there's really only a couple reasons that you would change the size of the hook. One of them is the size of your bait. That's probably the number one reason. Your size of your hook should match the size of your bait. If you have a big bait, you don't want to be using a small hook because you will not have enough hook exposed to hook that fish. Your hook needs to match that bait. If you are planning on keeping the fish and you want the fish to swallow it, you tend to use a smaller hook. So I do a lot of catch and release, even with game fish. So I tend to use a bigger hook. I don't let them run with it as long. I try to hook them in the side of the mouth so that I can get them in without them swallowing it, and I can release them. And a smaller hook will not allow you to do that. You need a bigger hook where it's exposed, where you can quickly get to the flag, pull your line up, set the hook, bring the fish in, and release them. But how I am going to attach that is I'm going to take my fluorocarbon leader that I have in the other hand that just has a straight end, and I'm going to make a loop on it. And I'm just going to do an overhand knot. I'm going to take a loop and I'm going to just tie it so that I have a loop. And then I'm going to do that twice so that I have a double knot. Now if I show you that, I got my line, I've got my loop, and I've got 2 knots. I'm going to clip off this tag. Now I'm going to take my snelled hook that I just dropped on the floor here somewhere. I'll just take another one out of the package, vacuum clean, and we'll pick that up at some point. I know my wife's listening at night now, that's why I said that. Alright, so then I'm going to take the my loop, and I'm going to take the hook, and I'm going to run the hook into the loop. This is the loop of my leader. So now that I'm going to take the hook and I'm going to go through the loop of my snelled part. Okay? I'm going to pull that together. That's how easy it is. That's how easy it is to change hooks. Now, I do like to add weight. I think the biggest two mistakes that people make the most is either they don't use a sinker at all, which sometimes you can get away with that if you're fishing shallow water or you're fishing finicky fish and you're using a fluorocarbon leader to get it to sink. But a lot of times I'm on active fish, so I like to get my bait down there as quickly as possible, and the best way to do that is to have some weight on your line. If you don't have weight, it takes forever for your line to get down. So I like to put weight, and the weight is just like the hook. It needs to match the size of your bait. The bigger the bait, the more the weight. Smaller the bait, less weight. You need to keep that bait down to your desired length, depth that you want your bait to be swimming at. If you don't have enough weight, the bait's going to swim up. Sometimes they'll swim up to the point, and it might have happened to some of you, they'll swim right up in the hole and you'll have a tangled mess in the hole. You don't want that to happen. You want to keep your bait down to that level. I like to use a simple split shot. And what I like to do, I always keep split shot in my ice fishing jacket. Really, your ice fishing jacket is your tackle box when you're ice fishing. This happens to be the Ice Striker one, or the Striker Ice, I guess you'd call it. And this is one of those flotation jackets. But it has numerous pockets, and I tend to remember, this is my pliers pocket, this is my sinker's pocket, this is where my hooks are, so that I can quickly, do what I gotta do out on the pond. So I like to save pill containers, this little Aspen container. I've probably been using the same container for 20 years now. It's full of sinkers, a little split shot. Depending on what I'm fishing, I might change the color of my split shot. Really, you want to have a natural presentation, but these have a little bit of shine. Back when we used to be able to use lead in Maine, we didn't have to worry about this. They didn't have a shine. Lead was awesome. I wish we could use it still, but we can't. So these aren't lead. They have a little shiny bit to it, which I don't like. Sometimes I'll put just a dab of black fingernail polish on it, just to make it less visible to that fish. Most of the time they don't care, but sometimes they are finicky, especially fish that have been caught before, fish that are pressured, fish in those community areas where there's a lot of anglers. You need to hide that. And I like to pinch them on with some pliers. I want to make sure that sinker's not going to come off. So now you can see it's hanging straight. I've got my hook hanging straight. I've got my sinker. And I clip the sinker on my upper loop, not my hook loop. So now I can still take this off if I want to. I can still take that hook and replace it without removing that sinker. Okay, this happens to be probably a little bit bigger hook than I normally would use. This is a 1/0 hook, but not uncommon. This is a great hook for pickerel, bass, because I tend to use a little bit bigger of a bait for those. I'm a guy that feels like bigger bait equals bigger fish. Bigger fish will take smaller bait, but you got to keep in mind, underneath the ice, it's dark down there, and especially when you get a lot of snow on, and you want to be able to allow those fish to see your bait, and I think that they can see a bigger bait better. If there's two different size bait there side by side, they're going to pick the bigger meal. They really will, especially those bigger fish. Their metabolism's a little bit slower in the winter. They're not going to feed as much, so when they do feed, they want a meal. They don't want just a snack. So don't be afraid to throw a bigger bait on or a bigger hook. You'll be surprised. You'll be surprised. You might be out fishing everybody else. What I also like to do when I get out into the lake, I always use a sounder. If you don't know how deep you're fishing, you might as well just pack up your gear and head home. You're wasting your time. If you're going out and all you're doing is just drilling a hole and you're not sounding and you don't know how deep you are, you don't know what's going on underneath the ice, that's not ice fishing. That's just going out and standing on the ice. So you need to know the depth of the water that you're fishing. I grabbed these sounders. They were down at Martin's a couple years ago, and I think I bought every one that was down there because they're hard to find. These ones with the spring on them. Just hold down the spring, put the hook on, and after you drill your hole, you lower this down, and you're really trying to find what the bottom's like. I'm looking for variations in the bottom. I'm looking for rocks that might be on a mud flat. I'm looking for weed lines. I'm looking for something that's different. Because really when you're ice fishing, you need to be looking for those things. That's where your fish are. The fish aren't going to be out in the wide open doing nothing. And when you lower this down and you feel the bottom, give it a couple of jigs. You know, fish might take it. I've had it happen before. Okay, so now that you found your depth, most of the time, not all the time, but I would say a majority of the time, 3/4 of the time maybe, I fish about 4 feet off the bottom. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake that people make as well. They fish too close to the bottom. They either fish too close to the bottom or they don't even know the depth that they're fishing at. So I try to run about 4 feet off bottom because I figure it's close enough that any fish on bottom can see it, and it's high enough that it's not going to be hidden in some weeds or hidden, you know, in some rocks or what have you. It's going to be high enough. Fish are always looking up. They're always looking up to feed. They're looking for bait that might be swimming by, prey, whatever. So if you're running too close to the bottom, you're going to catch fish. You're not going to catch as many fish. So if I'm fishing in 8 feet of water, say 8, 9 feet of water, which I typically do a lot, I'm going to be fishing about halfway. So I'm not going to be fishing a foot off bottom because my bait's going to be hidden if I do that. So keep that in mind. So how do I mark that on my trap? A lot of people ask that. What do you use for a marker on your line? Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things out on the market. People use, a lot of people just start out by just using knots, which I strongly recommend do not use knots, because what happens with a knot is the longer you have a knot there, especially, or when you pull on a fish or what have you, that knot's just going to get tighter and tighter to the point where you're never going to be able to get that knot out. You're going to have to cut your line and replace your line. That's the only thing you're going to be able to do. And a knot also tends to get hung up. When the ice is soft, or if you have a crack in the ice, sometimes when you're playing a fish, your line will slide up into one of those cracks and it'll get wedged there and you can't bring the fish in. And most of that time when that happens, you lose the fish. So a knot will not come out without a lot of help, so I would recommend not using a knot. So what I like to do is, let's just say I got down to the bottom, this is the bottom, and I said I want to bring it 4 feet, which I already showed you. This is 4 feet to me, so what I do is I just pull it through my fingers like this until I get to 4 feet, and this is where I want to put my marker. I made a loop. All I've done is I've made a loop, okay? I'm going to take 2 fingers and I'm going to go inside this loop, reach through the loop, and I'm going to grab the line below it and pull that line below it through, okay? And I have 2 fingers in there like that to show you. That's all I did. Now I'm going to take a match out of a book of matches. Take that, I'm going to put it inside there, and then I'm just going to cinch it down. so that that match is cinched on the line. So here's the line above, the line below, there's my match. Okay, I reel it up, or I wrap it on my spool until I get to that match. That match is on my spool. So now I know that when I set this down, I'm going to be exactly 4 feet off bottom. Okay? Now what's great about this match is they're easy to take off. You just do the reverse of what I just did. You just pull that loop out and it slides right out. Or, in the event that my line gets caught in the ice, if I just pull a little bit harder, this match is just going to break and pop right off. And that's especially true when they're wet. I'd probably have a harder time right now doing it, but when they're wet, they'll easily break, pop off, but they're strong enough that they'll last you through the day. What I do at the end of the day is I just take these off, discard them, throw them out, and put a new one on the next time I go. So I'm going to wrap these up. What's great about some of the new stuff that they've come out with, I used to be back in the day, I would just reel it up tight. I'd take my hook, I'd pull this tight, and I'd kind of just put the tip right in there a little bit, and it kind of held there. But now they've come up with these sleeves, which are pretty popular. Basically, it's just a strip of nylon, threaded, weave nylon. It's got some Velcro on it, and it's got a grommet on one end. Put the hook through the grommet, and then wrap it around the reel, and then it just Velcro's closed. And I have different colors for different traps that I have, because I have another set of jack traps that are my pike traps. I know that my blue ones are my general purpose ones, and my red ones are my pike traps. So it's just a good way of keeping your stuff organized. And I've been using these for a couple years now, and I love them. And your line will never come off. They can bounce around in your pack basket, your sled, throw them on the ice. You will not lose. You will not have line come off. I will say though, if you throw these on the ice by the hole, you'll end up losing them if the wind comes up. They'll blow off. Who knows where? Get buried in the snow. So I have a designated pocket in my tackle box jacket that I keep them in, and I know right where they are, so that when it's time to pick up at the end of the day, or if I go to another area that day, I can know right where they are. One little quick thing before I leave, give you one little tip, and that'll be on how to rig your bait. Which I get asked a lot. 99% of the time, I hook my bait in the back. I hook my bait in the back, in front of the back fin, or dorsal fin, some people call it. The only exception that I might have from doing that would be like if I'm fishing smelts, which is I don't do a lot, and smelts can be kind of they're not tough. They'll die pretty easily once you hook them, and sometimes you have to hook them through the lips just to keep them alive. And that's usually a really light leader. I'm doing that, and for really finicky fish. But most of the time, I'm fishing for something that's looking for a meal. I'm fishing for something aggressive, and it could be from pike all the way to brook trout. I'm hooking it in the back, and I didn't bring any bait with me, but I yanked out one of these swim baits that I use in bass fishing in the summertime. They don't really have a dorsal fin on it, but I took a marker and I made a black mark on where the dorsal fin would be, or the back fin. And right off, how you want to hold the bait is important. If you're holding the bait like this, with the head sticking out, it's going to end up on the ground. It's going to end up on the ice. They're going to get away. When you're holding the bait to hook it, you hold it by the head. Hold it by the head, cover his eyes, he can't see. That bait will be paralyzed. You will easily be able to hook that bait And I'm gonna hook that bait right in front of the dorsal fin a little ways, and I'm gonna go straight through, so that hook is going out the other side. I'm not burying that hook in the bait. I want that hook going right through the bait. I want that hook exposed so that I can hook that fish. Now, another thing to keep in mind is after you catch a fish with this bait and you still have the bait on, rehook it. Go a little bit further in front of it. Do not use the same hole. You want to rehook that bait, because if you don't rehook that bait, that whole old hole is going to be kind of worn out and the bait's going to get off your hook. It's either going to get stolen or it's going to wiggle free. Always rehook your bait when reusing the same bait. And you can use all the way up to the head pretty much. And really where I start hooking depends on two things. It depends on what am I trying to catch, what am I trying to accomplish, do I want them to swallow it, and what size bait am I using. The bigger the bait, the closer to the head I go, because you want to be able to make sure that that hook gets in their mouth when you go to pull them up. If you have it back too far and it's a big bait, you might go to pull it up and the hook's not quite in his mouth. So you want to keep that in mind. What am I fishing for? What size bait am I using? Do I want the fish to swallow it? Am I trying to hook him in the mouth? All determines where you're going to hook that bait. Now I hope you guys all have a great Christmas, and I really hope to see you guys out on the ice this winter, because I plan on being out there a lot. And thanks for joining me with these tips, and I'll do another one when we get out on the ice. Thank you.